Hello, everyone. I'm here for one of my stories. This is Lindsay Dunn, and today I am speaking with Michael Felker, who is, among other things, the editor of the film Something in the Dirt, which just premiered at Sundance 2022. Before we do that, we're going to get to know Michael a little bit. I had a little time to look at your IMDb page. It looks like you have worked with Justin and Aaron before on other projects. But I'd love to know how you got into film editing as a career.
Yeah, so I moved to LA, which is where I am at now, about 11 years ago. And I thought I was going to be, working at desks at production companies and being an assistant. And I didn't quite like it very much. So after some time in production and working on set, I found my true calling was post-production. So I worked as a logger at a post-production hall at night, which means I just took footage and just named it and categorized it and what have you. And then I just worked my way up until I finished some stints in assistant editing in reality television. And then once I left there, I went full freelance for editing, and I started working with cool filmmakers and other people doing projects like Justin and Aaron. So I worked with them on the last 4 feature films as their editor.
I'd love to know how you guys met and got connected. And then, like, how has your process and your partnership changed with them through these different movies?
Yeah, absolutely. It was during that stint where I was working on sets, where I was working as a production assistant, helping the production with their films. I worked with Justin and Aaron on their very first movie as a production assistant. Basically, Aaron and I went to the same film school. He's like 4 or 5 years ahead of me at Florida State Film School. So we got in touch with some alumni back in 2011, actually. And then they hired me on as their production assistant on their very first movie together. And we got along so well. It was incredibly fun. Lots of in jokes, lots of bonding, because it's one of those films where we shot in a camp and everyone who worked on the movie stayed at this camp, and then we just shot at the camp. So we just ate all of our meals together. We all bunked at the same place. And then after that movie, I went to post-production. Their first movie took off. And then once they came to do their second feature, I was already a freelance editor, and they're like, we got to bring you back. Come be our editor. So there you
go. Something in the Dirt. So it's this movie and about these two men, Levi and John, who are played by the directors, the writers. They're like, it's a very much an all-in sort of production, right? And their lives become linked when they decide to investigate this strange phenomenon happening in this LA apartment. How else would you describe the movie in your words? I'd like to know how you would talk about it with somebody, since you know it better than me.
No, I mean, you kind of you got the good gist of it. I would say, to me, Something in the Dirt is about 2 people who have had troubles in their lives and had, a bad run of luck that led them to the situation. And when opportunity struck with, this phenomenon that they found in one of their apartments, they bond in their mutual pursuit to find their purpose now in this ruins of their life. And this purpose is to explore this phenomenon, record it, and hopefully it lets them catapult themselves into the next, stratosphere of fame and fortune. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's the best way to put it.
But yet it's so much more than that too. The way that it changes and evolves over the course of watching the movie, and you have first what you think is the story of these 2 guys, and then you realize what you've been watching is maybe not exactly what happened, and it adds to the story. And so it's such a clever hybrid of there's science fiction, there's documentary, mockumentary, found footage, true crime. It's a very hard I feel like it is sort of a hard movie to explain without watching it. That it's so much better than the description that we gave it even.
Oh my
But
goodness.
yeah, yeah.
No, this movie is we even talked about this when they sent me the script to be on as an editor. We had an incredibly hard time figuring out what other comparisons to describe the movie with. It's like it's a little bit of this comedy, it's also like a sci-fi, it's also a conspiracy thriller, it's got horror as well. I mean, it's when you're trying to describe basically two characters who are in isolation and are driven mad by this thread and hopefully trying to figure out what it all means and what it means to them, you go through so many different genres. It's you're right, it's a very hard movie to describe without seeing it.
And even the way that their two characters have formed this sort of almost toxic relationship where they argue and they keep coming back because there is that, like you mentioned, the lack of purpose both of them have. They're looking for something to give their lives meaning, and what is happening between them and in this room, maybe that meaning, regardless of what it is and how harmful it might be. So it's got that too, that's one of my favorite, which is probably why one of the things I like about this movie is the dynamic between the two characters. With all of that going on, when they had asked me that if I wanted to interview you, and it was like, as I watched the movie, I realized, wow, this editor certainly had the work ahead of him, because you are having different formats of footage, qualities of footage, and in addition, there's all of these times where they sort of ramble and start talking, and as they ramble, there's sort of pictures and how do you describe it? Like, there's footage that's happening that's kind of echoing or mirroring, matching what they're saying. So so tell us, how did you do it? I mean, how did you go about this massive project? That's a big question, I know.
No, you know what? There's a lot of ways I could go about this question, but how did I go about it? So luckily with Justin and Aaron, so like going to the question where it's like, how do we work together and evolve?
Right.
We just start, because we had done 3 movies before this, and they're all pretty, by comparison to this one, they play more like a conventional movie. So we both me, Aaron, and Justin all know like how we would tell our stories visually and to find the pacing and whatnot. So when they came to me with this one, and they were just like, this is what we've kind of felt like when we were in the this is just what we wrote as a during the pandemic when we're all in isolation. We used that energy of being alone, away from the world, with only computers to like tell this story. So like you kind of have to approach it like you're just almost like you have a computer next to the movie and you're dragging assets on top of it. Like you are like, it's almost like the movie is like you're in the editing bay watching the movie, and you're just like, if they're talking about this, you're gonna show this thing that you found on the internet. And because everything they describe in the movie, they support it with like this weird tangent, this little image or this little found footage video that they found in the dark corners of the internet, and they use it to kind of string together like their theses. And it's really just that mindset of just like, we have to approach this movie like we're watching it on a computer with the whole world at our fingertips. And I know that's kind of like a weird way to describe this movie, but that's the only way to do it. You go a little mad and a little crazy editing like that, but you can obviously see that in the edit, that those characters start to lose their minds a little bit.
So at what point did they wrote the script? At what point did you get brought into the project, apart from like, okay, now I have the footage and I'm going to sit there and weave it all together? But did they give you the script and like before they shot it? And when did you start working with them on the project? I guess
I started just a little bit before they started production, where we kind of had these conversations, And when they sent me the script, they told me like, all right, we are treating this like an Errol Morris documentary specifically. Like these documentaries where you have these talking heads and they bring these like archival footage and assets and images to put over people talking about their lives or things that they think about. And so with that in mind, we, those boys, like, is shot with 3 people in one apartment, Justin, Aaron, and the producer Dave, because COVID protocols, that's all you could do. But I would be getting the footage immediately in my remote location right here in my office, and I would start putting together just like a base. And then we had a huge Google Doc of, or I guess a Google Sheet of different links to, let's try this asset out here to accompany this line in this scene. And it was a lot of experimentation. You kind of have to approach it like this narrative film, like a documentary. It's constantly ebbing and flowing, and it was the most extensive edit process that I've ever had, because it just, you could go, there was no like ending to the possibilities that could come from that.
I think that's probably one of the hazards of editing, right? Like, how do you know when you're done?
I mean, with like a more conventional movie, there's like, okay, there's definitely some signposts where it's just like, you edit the movie, the director comes in, they do their notes, and then when the director feels good, show it to the producers, people, and everybody's like, I think we got a good movie and we were done. But this one, it was always just pushing forward and trying more and more things. We had like a group of people that we would send the movie and just being like, it wasn't even like, is it like good or bad, like binary terms like that, but it's like, are the things that we're conveying going far enough or not, or too far? And like sometimes like we wanted to lean more on the too far because we want people to be like overloaded with information and whatnot. But at the end of the day, like it felt right when the characters felt right. And I think that's the same for all movies and all documentaries. It's like, if you feel like you've told the story of the 2 characters as best as you possibly can, that's when I feel like know when you're done, if that makes any sense.
So the segments where they sort of do the storytelling and there's like a frog and you're taking a picture of the frog or whatever and matching, like, did you search for that? Did they like say, we want to show, like you mentioned, there was a Google spreadsheet with all these things, but was there parts where they said, hey, look at the script and we want you to find some clips, or was that given to you?
Yeah. So the Google Sheet was so we could all, like me, Justin, and Aaron, would start pulling wherever we can. So they started with a couple of things that they found during like as they're writing the script as like a base. And that kind of gave me like enough of the like wheel spinning to be like, okay, I see what they're going for here and here. And then they would be like, well, this scene, we haven't found it. Can you go and find, like, just explore the internet and see what you can find? So I would find things and put them in the Google Sheet, this link, being like, I don't know where this fits, but this is cool because this fits like what Levi's talking about here or what John's going to lead to here. And that just gave a huge conversation, or at least started a wonderful dialogue between all of us, because we were able to just start trying out different resources.
So was there a particular moment that was, I don't know, hard? Like, what were some of the challenges that you would say in doing the editing for this movie, and how did you go about resolving what to do and move forward?
So it's really just because, okay, so the original cut of this movie was 3 hours and 45 minutes.
That's too long.
Which is a very long movie.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of factors to it where it's just like when you have 3 crew members, 2 of them being actors / directors / one of them's a cinematographer, one of them's a writer, like you shoot as much as you can and then you're figuring out in the edit later. So there's lots of scenes that are in there. So the biggest parts were just trying to like figure out the story while still trying to, like, it's a story at 3 hours and 45 minutes. It was told very, like, I think told well, but also with too much detail. So it's really just hacking away and figuring out what detail was necessary and what wasn't. And that really was the trickiest part with scenes that it was actually just the two of them talking. Like the conspiracy elements and the theorizing was actually easy to kind of like parse together.
Mhm.
But when it becomes like just John and Levi talking about their lives and getting to know each other, you have to be very careful about what you could put in, what you could pull out without like emotionally stunting a scene. So those were the trickiest scenes. There's a couple of big ones in the movie that are tricky to cut down.
Mhm. Yeah, I can see that. So maybe it's the things that kind of the wild conspiracies and all of that, the science fiction elements. It's like, well, that's part of the mystery. That's cool that people like to put out. But it's like that. I guess it goes back to that showing and not telling. Like, how are you going to? What do you want to show about these characters, and what's better to sort of remain a mystery, or that they could convey more with facial expressions or body language rather than having to use certain words.
Exactly. The hardest parts of editing, no matter what the movie is, it always comes down to making sure like the performances are there. Because if you're not believing the like John or Levi, the performances that they're doing, everything will fall apart, no matter how well you construct it. So you really have to fine tune like what they're saying, or not just what they're saying, I guess, but more of like how they're emoting it. How are they coming across? Are they outpouring all of their emotions? Are they a little more steely and want to keep them like information to themselves? Like, you know, you kind of have to look at body language too and seeing what is conveyed. And that is, you could scour takes over and over again, like single shot performances of John or Levi doing a thing, but maybe the 10th time you finally notice that like Levi's doing like a tell or scratching an eye or something that you're like, yeah. Oh my goodness, that scratch of the eye could be played as a beat where he's like lying or something, or he's like, I don't want to talk about this certain thing that I'm talking about now. And that's where the magic of editing is. That's where like you have an infinite ocean of possibilities to make the audience emotionally invested.
Mm-hmm. All right. So another thing that's really interesting about this movie, and you know, you can talk, I don't know if you want to talk about this or not, but the special effects and how those were kind of done. I think that would be interesting if you're willing to talk about that, even though that's not exactly, is that part of editing too?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, okay. I am not as good of a visual effects person as the person that we brought on, Alban. He did amazing work on the movie that, like, you know, he was able to, you know, make a plane fly through the sky, and I can't do that. But it does affect editing quite, you know, rigorously, where it's just like you kind of have to figure out the pace. Like you could do temp work where you could be like, all right, here's a bad composition of a plane going through to figure out timing. But you really have to make sure that you know, don't hold on a VFX shot too long. Otherwise you're throwing off the pace of a scene, or you don't want to make it too quick because then the audience won't know what it is there. And sometimes you don't have the visual effect, you kind of have to imagine it. And that's where it gets kind of tough. But once it's in there, oh my goodness, like it's you are just unlocking another part of your brain. You're like, oh my god, that plane is done, it looks awesome. But before, you're just kind of like playing with, and sound design is another big thing too with visual effects. You can temp in sound design much easier than you can anything visually while you're in the editing phase. So using sound design of a plane roar helps figure out the timing and the pace of a scene too.
So you're saying sometimes you're editing things before the special effects are fully in?
So in my process editing, you sometimes have to what we would call picture lock the movie, which means that the edit is done. You cannot change out any shots or timing windows like cuts, because after that you got to send it to visual effects, and you send like visual effects. You send, like, for example, if we're talking about a plane, you send them a shot of the sky. That shot has to be perfectly locked in. You can't change the timing on either end. Otherwise you will, you know, throw off the person making the plane timing through that window. So that's why it's like kind of like a weird magic imaginary game with visual effects, because all of that has to come after the movie is set in stone, so to speak.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is the editor has the real power in the movie.
Let's just tell everybody that that's the way we do it. It's just the editor has the power.
I mean, every role in the movie biz is important, but I think it's one of those interesting things. Like you have the director. It used to be the director's the most important. And at a certain point in this, there was like in the studio era, you had whoever the star was the most important. But yet the director, the one behind the camera, he's the one that controls like what is seen. But then after the director, then you get the editor who like further, you kind of have to put it all together and make it seamless and seem like everything was that way all along.
Oh yeah, no, it's the editor. It's one of my. I love editing. It's where the movie comes together. It's where you see the first signs of magic, and there's a lot of power and responsibility for an editor when in that position.
You can also do it from home.
I could do it from home. It's so great. I could be my wife and my cats all the time and create movies here. It's wonderful.
Yeah. So is there anything else any other interesting tidbits you want to share about the movie before we sign off?
Yeah, actually, because I'll guess I will drop a little fun spoiler, but I am in the movie, and that is kind of a fun little fact. I have a cameo.
I didn't realize that.
So there's a point where I show up in the movie, given that the movie is a documentary.
Your name. I remember now. Yeah.
I have an incredibly large pandemic beard. It is. No wonder you can't recognize me. I'm very different looking. And that was a whole nother thing it's like a new thing on this movie that I worked with on them too, was that they got to direct me, because I've made cameos in the movies, but not actually had lines of dialogue and scenes. And that was a whole process, especially with COVID protocols. I had to go through a lot of different protocols just to sit in an apartment and do an interview. So it was quite fascinating. I hope people will appreciate that cameo when they do see it in the movie.
Well, what they should have done is had Michael Felker, but had like somebody playing you. And then
that's a great idea. Oh my God. Wait, who would be me? I now want to know.
I know. Now you have to think about who you would want to play you.
Okay, I'll ruminate on that. I won't. I'm not going to sit here and saying like I'm Brad Pitt, 'cause I'm not. But I want to. That's a great idea. I would love to see a reenactment.
Yeah. So give us some insight on why they wanted to do that. Why did they decide to put you in the movie? Was it out of necessity because of COVID and we had to have some more people in it and you were on the job, or was it like, we need to put Michael in, it's time,
Well, I guess on a story level, and we've argued this because I tried to cut myself out of the movie a couple of times because I was like, I don't know, do you need me? But to the directors, they really made a good point in that it's the first time in the movie where another layer's peeled off and the actual like meta of the movie, that I am the actual editor of the movie, is in the movie talking. So I think they wanted to have that layer peel off of the movie to really now mess with what's real or what's not in the movie. Not to layer on too much about what that point is without people who haven't seen the movie, but something to look forward to later. But the main excuse was there's cameos for a lot of people in this movie, a lot of people that are interviewed, and it was another excuse for them to reach out and make movies with their friends and family, because at the end of the day, there's a lot of heart in this movie because like the pandemic was a big thing that hit the entire industry, hit the entire world. And when they made this movie, they were like, man, making this movie is the greatest outlet and purest form of joy we can all have together. And they wanted to work with people that they liked on set. Yeah.
And these two, Levi and John, they're sort of, in a way, they're surrogates for Justin and Aaron. They also want their purpose. So they made this movie about these two guys making a movie. It's really very sweet when you think about it.
Yeah. I love this movie to my core because, as weird and as like crazy dark this movie can be, it's made with a lot of love. And I love every second of it on screen. So yeah.
Okay, well, Michael, I really do thank you for your time. It's you've made me fall in love with the movie all over again.
Yay.
So could you tell people how they can find more about your work or follow you on social media? Where would you direct them for that?
Yeah, I would go to my Twitter, which is Michael L. Felker, and my Instagram's the same way. I'm most active on those two. So yeah, find me there and follow me more there.
Okay, well, I will definitely put that in the show notes and the notes in the YouTube video so that people can look you up and follow your work. And I encourage everybody to check out Something in the Dirt. Hopefully that will be distributed somewhere soon, or maybe at another film festival coming up. But I do recommend this movie. And I thank you for joining me on another episode of One of My Stories. Goodbye, everybody.